I know what you're talking about when you say sometimes when you face these things down, it just immediately takes the legs out from underneath it. And it's almost comical how fast it just all falls apart when you're just kind of shining a little bit of truth at the situation, and you see how rickety the logic and the just the thinking is behind these fears or our other idiosyncrasies and survival mechanisms. But other times your emotional state is, we'll say, triggered, for lack of a better term. It's a wildly overused term, but when I say that, I mean we're
Hmm.
talking about, traumatic stress triggers, where when we're not talking about, oh, you had a bad day at work and now you're traumatized. At least that's what you're telling people on Twitter. We're talking about
Right.
unprocessed childhood stuff, which we've both talked about. We know it's there for you. And when we get triggered, our our right side of our brain, certain emotional centers in that brain, where memory is processed to some extent. It's also where a lot of our creativity and our imagination lies. So that's why it's kind of a hotbed for anxiety. Not only is it a place where we can imagine very doom and gloomy futures in granular detail, but it's also a place where we can call up memories, not necessarily just the the pictures and images and sounds and smells that we remember, the sensations, but the embodied memory, the memory of what it felt like to go through those things, because that's ultimately the most deeply rooted artifact of those traumatic events, is the unprocessed emotion about the event. um, and because that exists in your mind presently, when that gets electrified, gets powered up, it anybody who deals with PTSD knows that a flashback doesn't feel like a flashback. It doesn't feel like a memory. It feels like something that's happening right now. And so, as powerless as you ever felt in your entire life, that's what's coming up when you're feeling this way.
Hmm.
Um, so it makes sense that you wouldn't have the um, analytical apparatus to pick that apart. But also, even if you did, when you're triggered, you can't talk your way out of it, because we're talking about a part of the brain that is upset, and this part of the brain evolved far before the emotional and the more evolved emotional part, our linguistic parts of our brain. And it's the part of our brain that we share with cold-blooded lizards, right? It's the snake brain. That's where our fight or flight centers live. And yeah, so it's all intertwined. And when you're having a traumatic memory, it's not a memory. It's a present experience that you feel stuck in, and you're also turning off. You're not turning it off. Your brain just turns off this part of your mind that senses and has a context of time, specifically the duration of time. So that's partly what's screwing with your brain, is that not only are you feeling powerless, like you're being waterboarded, by hypochondria, it feels like it'll never end. And that's a key part of the traumatic memory that, often gets overlooked, is that feeling that, no, you can't just outlast this. You can't just breathe and wait for this to go away, because this is endless, or your experience of it is endless. So, that being said, also your other cognitive centers, like your sense of self, your executive function, your ability to see yourself and moderate your own actions, your linguistic center, so your ability to put your emotions into words and to be able to talk to yourself. These all get downregulated massively when these other centers are lit up like a Christmas tree. So it kind of makes you a little bit brain dead. And that's why trying to, mind your way out of your feelings is no good for a number of reasons. So partly what we're doing here is to try to use tools to make you more capable in those moments of steering yourself away from this emotional dysregulation and these triggery events, to be able to let them pass, to be able to, find emotional ways of being a context that can calm the situation down. Because the best path into these things is through the emotional realm. But obviously that's the hardest, right? No one wants to hear that. But that's what you're experiencing when you see the reality, because that's what it is, that you are bigger than these emotions, because you just have to be. You're the context in which they were formed, that they've lived and persisted, in which they crop back up. So you're not trying to convince yourself of this. You're just trying to appreciate the reality of it. And so that's one advantage that we have, is that this story is manufacturing a story, and it's trying to twist reality to make a point, whereas we have reality on our side. So we don't have to produce a counter argument to these anxieties. We just have to let reality be present to as many parts of our mind as we can, especially the emotional mind. So that's a long-winded way of saying that sometimes trying to, you know, like I said, mind your way out of this, like think your way out of these things, can just make it worse. If not, certainly it doesn't always help, or we're not capable of doing it, or not always. Sometimes trying to think your way out of it can just deepen the notion that it is a fight of some sort, that it's a you or me. And it's very easy to feel like hypochondria is trying to kill you, that it's, because that's what it's trying to make you afraid of, right? So it's not a huge leap to be like, this thing is dangerous and wants me to die, when in reality it actually wants you to live. It just sees you trying to live a better, healthier life as an affront to, as we mentioned before, the status quo, which it sees as the pathway to maintaining existence, maintaining survival.